you're just taking the larger item or the larger expression and making it into a smaller one. In math, with variables, it means basically the same thing. 2x's plus 3x's, or 2 apples plus 3 apples, is the same thing as saying 5 apples. And if you don't get that quite yet, that's okay too. We'll jump into that more later. Coefficient. That one's a tricky one. If you didn't get anything in your box, that's okay. The coefficient is the number in front of a variable. Number in front of a variable. So I'm going to keep using this 2x because it's easy. In the term, or the expression 2x, the 2 is going to be the coefficient. Let's just dash here. If I have 3y, the 3 is going to be the coefficient. It's always just the number in front of the variable. Big word, simple concept. And last but not least, the distributive property. And this one isn't necessarily one we can give a perfect definition to, but basically what it means is if you have something that looks like this, a quantity times a sum, so A times the sum of B plus C. The distributive property allows me to multiply A times B and then add it to the quantity A times C. So that might have been a little confusing. That's okay. It's the same thing as or equal to AB, so A times B, plus A times C. And that's called the distributive property because we're distributing the quantity to both terms individually. And this might more be an example rather than a definition, but I think that's the easiest way to see it. We don't all think in words, and that's okay. So we can use the distributive property in order to simplify math expressions. So I've given you 2 at the bottom here with only numbers. However, I'm going to warn you in advance, this isn't what we tend to use the distributive property for. However, I want to show you this because it's easy to prove that the distributive property works. So if we're given 10 times the sum of 10 minus 5, the first method follows order of operations, if you've heard of that. It says we're going to do what's inside of the parentheses first, and then we're going to multiply to the outside. So in this case, it'd be 10 minus 5 is just 5, and 10 times 5 becomes 50. What the distributive property says is I can take 10 times each individual term inside and then subtract. So 10 times 10 is 100 minus 10 times 5 is 50. So 100 minus 50 gives me 50. Notice we did the problem 2 different ways but got the same answer. That happens a lot in math, and it's one of my favorite things about math is because it essentially means there are so many different solutions we could use. We don't even know every single option there is. Anyway, back to the point. I get excited. Let's try that again with more numbers here. 6 times the quantity 4 minus 2. My method 1 says do what's in the parentheses first. Totally accurate. 6 times 2 is 12. Distributive property says, I'm actually going to do the distribution first. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times negative 2 or minus positive 2 would be 12. 24 minus 12 is 12. Before I end this video, however, I want to show you what it's going to look like more often in math. More often, we're going to have something that looks like this. 3 times the quantity x minus 2, where I'm working with a variable instead of just numbers. Now notice, in this case, there is no method 1. We cannot simplify inside of the parentheses before we multiply. So we have to use that second method of distribution. So that's what we're going to do. 3 times x, 3 times negative 2, or minus 3 times positive 2, and I get 3x minus 6. Like I said, there would be no way to do that with method 1. Let's give you one example here to try on your own before we go. Let's actually do 4 times x minus y. Go ahead and give that one a shot. Pause the video if you need to. Alright, hopefully you had time to pause the video if needed. Let's jump into it. Again, we can't subtract an x from a y. They're not the same. They're not like terms. So because they're not like terms, method 1 doesn't exist, and we have to go directly to method 2, where we're going to distribute that 4 into each term and then subtract. 4 times x is 4x. They're not like terms. I can't combine them. I just have to stick them next to each other. 4 times y is 4y. So there's our answer. This is the distributive property. If you have any questions, let me know.